Okay, let's set the scene. We're dropping you right into the Alcazar of Madrid. It's 1665 AD. Picture this. Heavy velvet, maybe that thick Spanish summer heat, and somewhere, the sound of a queen in labor.
A pretty dramatic moment in itself.
Definitely. But the context,
Hey,
that's where it gets, well, horrifying. The queen, Mariana of Austria,
nah.
she's not just the wife of the father, King Philip IV, she's also his niece.
Right, niece and wife. And that specific relationship, uncle-niece marriage, had basically become the standard operating procedure for the Spanish House of Habsburg by then.
Standard procedure, wow.
And the child born that day, Charles II, he was really the ultimate result, the embodiment of a genetic debt that this dynasty had been building up for centuries.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this wasn't some historical accident, was it?
Not at all.
This feels like the direct, almost inevitable consequence of nearly 200 years of very deliberate, calculated choices about who married whom.
Exactly. Systematic decisions.
So, our goal today, our deep dive, is to trace that family line, the one that leads straight to Charles II. We want to show you precisely how this obsession with keeping power pure led to, well, a biological train wreck and a political collapse that sparked a massive European war.
Yeah, it's much more than just a sort of grim historical anecdote. When you actually map out their family tree, it's less like, a branching tree.
Right.
And much more like a tangled, tight spider's web. We have the sources now to really analyze how their political strategy became their biological downfall.
So to understand why they kept doing this, we need to start with their core philosophy, their family motto, almost.
Ah, yes, famous one.
Bella Gentilly, to Felix Austria-Nub, which basically means,
Let others wage war, you happy Austria marry. Simple as that.
And, I mean, for a while, that strategy was kind of brilliant, wasn't it?
Oh, incredibly successful initially. Marriage wasn't about love. It wasn't even just about alliances in the usual sense. It was a tool, a strategic tool for acquiring territory and power.
And then keeping that power locked inside the family bloodline.
Precisely. And through this, they accumulated vast lands. By 1519, you get Charles V, who ruled an empire so enormous. Well, the famous saying is true. The sun quite literally never set on it.
But hang on, looking at the sources, even Charles V himself, this giant figure, he wasn't exactly starting with a clean genetic slate, was he?
No, not at all. That's a key point.
His parents, Philip I and Joanna of Castile, they were first cousins, shared grandparents. Was that unusual back then, or just normal royal behavior?
It was common enough among royalty across Europe, yes. But the Habsburgs took it to another level. It wasn't occasional, it was systematic. You start with that first cousin marriage, and you're already accruing, let's call it a genetic debt.
Okay.
Then a crucial moment happens when Charles V abdicates. He splits his massive empire. His son, Philip II, gets Spain and its territories. His brother, Ferdinand I, gets the Austrian lands and the Holy Roman Empire.
So he creates two distinct Habsburg lines.
Exactly. Two lines that then spent the next century or so essentially acting as the primary, almost exclusive marriage pool for each other.
Ah, I see. So they're doubling down, constantly intermarrying between these two closely related branches.
Exponentially compounding the genetic risk with each generation.
Which brings us squarely to Philip II of Spain. It really feels like he's the one who locks the dynasty onto this destructive path.
He certainly solidified the pattern.
He had 3 wives before, but his final marriage in 1570, that seems like the blueprint for disaster. He marries his niece, Anna of Austria, who was only 20.
Yes, Uncle Mary's niece. But it was even more complicated than that. Anna wasn't just his niece. She was also his first cousin, once removed through another line.
Oh, wow. So multiple layers of shared ancestry in just that one marriage.
Exactly. It's not just one instance of inbreeding. It's stacking them up. And this is where the biological mathematics start to get really quite alarming.
Right. So if this risk is compounding generation after generation, how do scientists actually measure this genetic debt you mentioned?
Well, what's fascinating here is the mathematics of inbreeding are as precise as they are terrifying. We use something called the coefficient of inbreeding, often just called the F value.
Okay, F value. What does that tell us?
It quantifies the probability that an individual has inherited 2 identical copies of a gene from a single recent ancestor. These would be identical by descent. In a general population where people aren't closely related, that F value is very close to 0.
Makes sense.
Now, if your parents are first cousins, your F value jumps to 0.0625. That's a significant increase in the chance of inheriting 2 copies of the same recessive gene, which might be harmful if expressed.
Okay, 0.0625 for first cousins. But the Habsburgs, They weren't just doing occasional first cousin marriages, they were doing uncle-niece, double first cousin.
Repeatedly, generation after generation. So those F values just kept climbing.
Yeah.
Philip III, for instance, he was the son of that uncle-niece marriage between Philip II and Anna. He started life with an already elevated F value.
And then he married. Who's...
Yeah. He married Margaret of Austria. Now, she was his first cousin, and also related through another complex link involving his sister-in-law's sister. It gets incredibly convoluted.
So more shared bloodlines added to the mix.
Exactly. Which means their son, Philip IV, born in 1605, he inherited an even higher F value. And by the time we get to him, the physical signs of this genetic burden are starting to become really quite apparent.
You mean the famous Habsburg jaw?
Precisely. The Habsburg lip, or technically mandibular prognathism, this very distinctive protruding lower jaw, became almost a physical signature of the dynasty.
And this is a direct result of the inbreeding.
Yes. It's caused by the increased chance of inheriting two copies of the recessive genes that influence jaw development. When those recessive genes get expressed because there isn't a dominant normal gene to mask them, you get this pronounced feature.
It's striking how you can actually see it getting worse through the royal portraits over time.
You absolutely can. It's maybe mild in Maximilian I. You see it clearly in Charles V. It's quite pronounced in Philip II and Philip III.
But with Philip IV, it looks like it became a real physical impediment.
It really did. And it wasn't just cosmetic. Philip I's long reign, from 1621 to 1665, coincided with Spain's decline as a major European power. And sources suggest his severe jaw deformity made speaking clearly quite difficult.
Which must have affected diplomacy, governing.
Absolutely. Communication with ambassadors, giving commands, it would have impacted. Plus, the general health issues often associated with high levels of inbreeding, things like chronic fatigue, lower resistance to illness, likely affected his energy and capacity for effective rule.
It just seems incredible that they kept going down this path, seeing Philip IV, seeing the obvious physical trait. Didn't anyone recognize the danger before his final marriage, the really catastrophic one?
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But the mindset seems to have been this potent mix of desperation to produce an heir and this deeply ingrained belief in keeping the Habsburg bloodline pure, which really meant keeping all the titles and territories consolidated within that tiny genetic circle.
Purity over health, essentially.
That seems to be the calculation they made. And that leads us to the ultimate disaster in 1649. Philip IV, now 44 years old, marries his niece, Mariana of Austria. She was just 15.
15, his niece. And wait, wasn't she originally supposed to marry someone else?
Yes. That's another layer of how grim this was. Mariana was originally betrothed to Philip IV's son, Balthasar Charles. But Balthasar Charles died young.
So they just reassigned her, from the dead son to the aging father.
Basically, yes. The individual barely seemed to matter. The goal was purely dynastic. Produce a male heir with a correct, undiluted Habsburg blood. Nothing else mattered.
But the genetic warning signs must have been screaming by then. Didn't Philip and Mariana have children before Charles II who showed problems?
They did. Their first son, Philip Prospero, born in 1657, was a tragic example. Sources describe him as incredibly sickly from birth. He struggled to walk, struggled to speak, suffered from frequent seizures.
Like epilepsy.
Very likely epilepsy, yes, common in highly inbred lines. He had a terribly compromised immune system and died just before his 4th birthday in 1661.
That should have been the clearest warning imaginable, a direct result of that uncle-niece match.
You would absolutely think so. It was a horrific preview. But the pressure for a male heir to secure the Spanish throne was immense, so they tried again. And 4 years after Philip Prospero's death, in 1665, Charles II was born.
And this birth, this is the moment the dynasty essentially hits rock bottom, biologically speaking. The descriptions of Charles II at birth are shocking.
They really are. Contemporary accounts and later analysis based on portraits and descriptions paint a picture of an infant with a disproportionately large head, very weak limbs, and that mandibular prognathism, the Habsburg jaw, at its absolute most extreme.
That's so extreme, that.
So extreme that his upper and lower teeth couldn't meet at all. Chewing solid food was physically impossible for him throughout his life.
Wow. And the physical problems were just the start, right? There were developmental issues, too.
Profound developmental delays, yes. He apparently didn't speak his first real words until around age 4. And even then, his speech was often described as unintelligible, partly due to the jaw deformity, but also likely due to underlying cognitive limitations.
No walking.
He couldn't walk without assistance until he was about 8 years old. The court, of course, was desperate to explain this away.
Hence the nickname, El Hechizado.
Exactly. The Bewitched. They blamed curses, demonic influence, divine punishment, anything but the obvious truth staring them in the face,
Which was the genetics.
which was the devastatingly predictable result of generations of intensive inbreeding. The modern genetic reality is far more chilling than any curse.
So let's connect this back to that measurement you mentioned earlier, the coefficient of inbreeding, the F value.
Okay.
What was Charles II's?
Modern genetic analysis, based on tracing the incredibly tangled pedigree, estimates Charles II's coefficient of inbreeding, his F value, at 0.254.
0.254. Okay, put that in perspective for us again. You said first cousins were.
0.0625.
So Charles II's level was 4 times higher than the result of a single first cousin marriage.
More than 4 times, yes. To put it even more starkly, his F value, 0.254, is actually higher than the theoretical value for the offspring of a brother-sister or parent-child union, which is 0.250.
That's staggering. Higher than if his parents had been siblings.
Because it wasn't just one close pairing. It was multiple lines of descent converging through repeated close intermarriage over many generations. This extreme concentration of shared genes meant he had an unprecedentedly high chance of inheriting identical, harmful recessive genes from both parents, leading to multiple severe genetic disorders.
Including the physical issues, the likely intellectual disability, epilepsy.
Yes, a whole constellation of problems rooted in that massive genetic load.
And the Spanish court spent his entire life, all 34 years, essentially trying to hide this reality, didn't they?
Completely. It was an exercise in stage management. Portraits were commissioned to be as flattering or perhaps misleading as possible. Public ceremonies were tightly choreographed to minimize exposure of his weaknesses.
But the truth leaked out. Foreign diplomats weren't fooled.
No, their reports back to their home courts are often quite brutal. They described a king who often drooled, whose speech was incomprehensible, who seemed detached, sometimes paranoid, and clearly incapable of governing effectively.
And the central issue haunting his entire reign was succession. Could he produce an heir?
That was the overriding question. Despite his obvious limitations, the political need for an heir was paramount. So he was married twice. Both times it was predictably disastrous.
Tell us about the first marriage.
His first wife was Marie-Louise of Orléans, a French princess. By all accounts, she was deeply unhappy, even horrified. Her private letters, which survive, confirm that Charles was physically incapable of consummating the marriage.
She actually wrote that.
She described him in devastating terms, things like more dead than alive. She endured the marriage for 10 years under immense pressure to conceive before dying relatively young herself in 1689, childless, likely from the immense physical and psychological strain.
And the second marriage, any more hopeful?
Equally hopeless, sadly. He then married Maria Anna of Neuburg, a German princess. Her accounts paint an even darker picture of his later years.
How so?
She described him as increasingly paranoid, prone to sudden, sometimes violent outbursts, strangely obsessed with looking at his own reflection, and becoming deeply reliant on priests and exorcists. He genuinely seemed to believe he was possessed.
So the Bewitched nickname wasn't just political spin. He perhaps believed it himself.
It seems very possible, yes. And physically, as he entered his 30s, he deteriorated rapidly. He looked decades older than his actual age. His diet was almost entirely liquids because chewing and swallowing solids remained impossible.
Just a living ghost, almost.
In many ways, yes. Constantly battling infections, weak, frail. Everyone in Europe knew his death was coming, and everyone knew it would mean war because there was no clear Habsburg heir.
And he finally died. When?
November 1st, 1700. He was only 34 years old. And with him, the Spanish Habsburg dynasty, which had dominated Europe for centuries, ended forever.
Was there an autopsy? Did they confirm the physical issues?
Yes, there was. And the findings were stark. The physicians reported his reproductive organs were severely underdeveloped, confirming he could never have fathered children. They famously described his internal organs as being essentially putrefied and corrupted, a truly grim end.
And his death, without a designated heir acceptable to all of Europe, that immediately triggered the conflict everyone feared.
Instantly. The War of the Spanish Succession erupted, dragging on for 13 years, redrawing the map of Europe and fundamentally shifting the balance of power away from Spain.
So when we step back from this specific tragic story,
Yeah.
what's the bigger takeaway here?
Well, so what does this all mean? This raises an important question. Why did this kind of extreme systematic inbreeding largely stop among European royalty after this?
Did it stop because of him?
In many ways, yes. The sheer, undeniable biological catastrophe embodied by Charles II served as the ultimate horrifying cautionary tale. Other ruling houses saw the fate of the Spanish Habsburgs and were forced to reconsider their own marriage strategies.
They started diversifying the gene pool, so to speak?
Gradually, yes. They began to understand, perhaps implicitly at first, that the perceived benefit of consolidating power within a single bloodline carried an unacceptably high biological price tag. Charles II was the proof.
And thinking about it, the real horror here isn't a curse or some supernatural evil. It's something much more chilling, isn't it?
Absolutely.
The monster, as some might have seen him, wasn't born of malice. He was the direct, predictable result of generations of cold, calculated choices. Choices made by people who believed they could manipulate and, in their view, improve upon nature itself for political gain.
A belief in controlling bloodlines for power.
Exactly. And it really makes you, the listener, consider what is the true cost? What price does the relentless pursuit of contained power ultimately demand, not just politically, but biologically, right down to the human level?